Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you. We're going to be talking about cryptocurrency today. And I got to tell you, I'm kind of a nerd about this. I read a book called Cryptonomicon in 1999 by a gentleman named Neil Stephenson. And it is a doorstop of a book about crypto codes during World War II. And it goes up into using crypto technology for banking. And again, this was written in 1999. Which is remarkable. So sounds super nerdy. It's a better read than it sounds like, I promise you. And it's always fascinated me, this idea that we could use the internet and sort of ease these transactions and have these codes in place that protect the transactions. The one thing that I've struggled with when it comes to cryptocurrency is why we need it. The sort of people who generally need to hide when I think of people who need to hide their transactions, it's usually people who maybe aren't doing very nice things. And certainly we've seen cryptocurrency specifically be used in that way. So when the Bank of North Dakota announced that our state was going to be launching a stablecoin called the Roughrider Coin, my first reaction was super cool because that's the science fiction nerd in me. And then the political side of me said, but why? And I like to think that I'm a smart guy. And I like to think that I can figure these things out usually on my own. And for the life of me, I'm not real sure what the point of this is. And I'm saying that not because it's not a criticism, because I'm sure there is a point. I'm sure there is a good reason we're doing this. And that's why we have our guest on, Don Morgan. He's the president and CEO of the Bank of North Dakota. Mr. Morgan, first of all, how are you? Second of all, have you read Neil Stephenson's Cryptonomicon?
I have not. I've read a lot in the space. I have not read that, and it's great to join you.
You should read it. It's fantastic. It is the literary foundation for cryptocurrency, if that makes any sense. But let's start. First question first. I think people understand what something like a stable coin is, unlike, say, cryptocurrency, where the value is kind of tied to the supply and demand reality of cryptocurrency, which makes it very volatile. A stable coin's value is actually pinned, kind of like how we think of how the US dollar used to be pinned to the gold standard. A stable coin works the same way, where it's pinned to some underlying asset that makes it stable. It's right there in the name. But I think the thing people maybe don't understand is why North Dakota banks need this.
Yeah, confluence of events. You're absolutely right. The cryptocurrency space up to this point, you haven't seen banking writ large kind of get into it in a material major way, right? Why is that? Because it's in that really kind of speculative asset, speculative investment, high volatility space. Really, the value is based on belief, right? Bitcoin, belief that there's a limited supply. Somebody said somewhere. Now, that belief has grown tremendously, and belief, has power. But banking has not got involved. Also, what's occurring is fintech evolution in banking. The fintech disruption of banking, continuing to move banking services into phones and handheld devices, with fintech apps, non-bank, companies and software systems, really kind of around the banking system. Then you have the Genius Act that gets passed at the federal level, which really carves stablecoin more definitively out of the crypto space and makes it more, I'm going to say, ready for banking prime time, right? Yes, it's tied to the dollar. Yes, it's tied to no more than 93-day treasuries. But even more important, it started the framework for audit requirements, for reserve, for permitted issuer rules. Now it's the beginning, right? There's got to be a lot more regulation built out. But we looked at it as an industry and go, okay, now it's ready for banking prime time. So much that the major core providers are getting involved. Shortly after Genius, you heard FIS, Spicer, Jack Henry, kind of the big three banking core providers in the nation announce, digital asset platforms and stablecoin intent. Fiserv is Bank of North Dakota's existing core provider. And at the end of the day, nothing much gets done in banking unless the cores are involved, because they're our core database that makes sure all the debits balance and everything balances, right? So you couple all that, Genius Act, FinTech evolution, Bank of North Dakota standing up in the FinTech space for our North Dakota banks and credit unions, and the cores getting involved. And that was really the genesis of the idea. Okay, now it's time to issue a North Dakota Roughrider Coin. But more importantly is the underlying transaction framework for banking, that blockchain-enabled transaction framework. That's the major part of this announcement. It's just utilizing Roughrider Coin as a mechanism to move into that.
So I think I understand sort of the difference between stablecoin and crypto, right? I mean, it's backed by a dollar. It makes a lot more sense to me than just crypto does. I mean, I've struggled with how do you mine for something that is not real. That's a whole nother show. But
it just seems like a video game to me.
Yeah, but I'm sort of also with Rob with the what's the point? What's the use of this whole thing? And I talked to somebody in the banking industry 2 days ago, and I started out the conversation by saying, I don't want to be that old guy saying, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I want to get this. But it seems to me like this idea of using stablecoin, 99.9% of people are never going to use this, because if I want to use it at the gas station to buy gas, don't we also have to have a business who's willing to accept stablecoin as part of this? Like the actual I get why a bank might want to be able to do more instantaneously money going back and forth, but to the average consumer, how does this affect their life at all? And like trying to wrap my head around me, how will this affect me in any way?
I could tackle that. We'll start here. So a lot of the announcements you're hearing, so think Wyoming Frontier Coin, Circle has announced, many others outside of the banking industry, they're working on that end user merchant adoption. So they're trying, I think Wyoming Frontier Coin is up to 7 blockchains. They're trying to figure out that interoperability with the blockchains for that end user. So you can spend Frontier Coin at your convenience store, at your gas station, in your everyday life. If you look down the road, that's part of the continued fintech evolution that's occurring that, quite frankly, is starting to leave banking a little bit behind, right? All consumers want more in the palm of their hand. We see this as another step in that direction long term. If that merchant adoption takes off down the road, and it might take 10 years, but if it takes off, all of a sudden you've got tremendous amount of financial transactions and deposits leaving the banking industry. What we differentiate is, and why we're starting with the back end of banking is really, okay, we believe banking needs to get involved now for that long-term relevancy, to compete in that space, to save those deposits, to be able to offer, those value adds that a stablecoin, blockchain-backed, enabled, interoperable transaction system will offer. In simpler terms, banking had been on payment rails that are old and traditional. They were built in 1970. They're antiquated, and they were built before the digital age. This would be the first of its kind to begin to build a blockchain-enabled digital transaction framework for banking. That's really what we're doing here. That's the first use case. Now, once that's there, then the possibilities open up. Okay, can banks offer deposit accounts? Are there correspondent services that can be offered? The possibilities will be there, but if we don't take this first use case for banking won't have those possibilities. It will still be on the old payment rails and be at risk if merchant adoption takes off, those payment rails being out here outside of banking. So we're really talking about the long-term relevancy of community banking and credit unions.
That makes a lot of sense to me, in that it's sort of, we're developing it, the tools on the table now. How are banks going to pick it up and use it? We're kind of leaving that up to the market. Is that fair to say? This tool's out here, find ways to use it now. Is that what we're saying?
That's the idea, is to first, our deliverables for next summer is to develop a successful Roughrider Coin transaction in the Fiserv digital assets platform with us and some pilot banks and credit unions in the state. That's our deliverable. Once we have that, then you can look, we as an industry in the state can look at, okay, what's the next use case? Probably more likely than not is those banks then offering a deposit account product that utilizes that transaction framework. So what are the value adds there? Well, you get instantaneous global settlement. You get 24/7, 365-day access. You don't have to wait for the bank to be open. And you've got currency on and off ramps. We got a lot of clients in the state, think large energy companies, ag exporters, manufacturers that are doing international payments, cross-border payments, and they're going to want that value. Our hope is they can find it in their local friendly community bank or credit union, rather than eventually finding it in Circle Down or something along those lines that is outside of banking.
So this helps. I'm sorry, just one follow up then. So this helps those banks, all of North Dakota. And by the way, I don't think people understand how central the banking industry is to North Dakota. We think of our state as agriculture. We think of it as energy. Well, banks, I mean, there's a reason North Dakota has a Bank of North Dakota. There's a reason why you look across our political landscape, how many people come from banking family. Senator Hoeven is from a banking family. The Stenjum family are in banking, and on and on. Tom Campbell, who's run for various offices, former state lawmaker, he's in banking. Banking is very central to the industries that are here. So this makes a lot of sense. But to be clear, Chad was kind of talking about a consumer orientated use. That's not what Roughrider is for currently. Is that one of the plans? You said once it's sort of established and we've done some of these use cases and figured out, is there a day where somebody could be paid in Roughrider Coin or go buy groceries with Roughrider Coin?
Well, Chad's exactly right. That's going to depend on a lot of factors. The biggest one being how many businesses in the state are going to want to offer the ability to point of sale transact in stablecoin. That's a huge unknown.
What has to offer something that they're not getting from the dollar currently?
Well, but isn't one of the things they'll get is people not using their credit cards and not having to pay that swipe fee?
Well, so one of the drivers, and I think that's a big driver for like Frontier Coin and others, and I don't necessarily think they're wrong. They are also today, that point of sale machine is running on pretty old traditional payment rails, and the cost of that structure. So think all the bins and Visa, MasterCard and the banks and everything, and everybody's got a piece of that pie. Let's call it, $3 a transaction. With the blockchain enabled stablecoin mechanism transaction framework, the costs are estimated at like a tenth of a cent. Now, will that all transpose into lower fees for the end consumer swiping their card? It sure could. I think everybody involved is still going to get paid somehow, some way, because, these companies have to survive. But I think it will be something significantly less than the 2.5%, 3.5% fees you're paying per swipe, just because the cost basis is much less. It automates so much. You've got the blockchain doing the bulk of the lifting. And so the productivity of all those intermediary companies supporting that payment rail is going to improve drastically.
So it seems to me like this is sort of a forward thinking, like it's not going to affect me right now as a consumer, but we know this technology is coming. We don't want every community bank, every national bank having their own sort of stable coin. That it seems like this is a role for the government to step in, set up this infrastructure so we're ready when this might be what the consumer is using at the gas station. But me as a consumer, it likely won't affect me for the short term, but it's putting in that long-term infrastructure to be able to do this stuff down the line. Is that correct?
You're spot on. It's the long-term strategic thought there, the immediate, available to consumers. There's not that immediate use case today, but there sure could be far down the road. And we say 10 years, but this space continues to speed up.
Right.
Every time we estimate, it shortened the time frame, right? So it could be 5 years. It really could. It could be 3. We don't know. I think we're looking at it as we need to get involved now. Now is the time for the banking industry to start getting serious about this. And that Genius Act was a threshold moment that, like I said, now really kind of made it ready for banking prime time.
One of the things I there's a lot of things I don't like about cryptocurrency so far, in that to date, a lot of the people operating in that space have been not very credible. And
Yeah.
we've certainly seen some of the scam. I'm not saying everybody by any stretch of the imagination, but it has enabled some abuse and some crime. And that's unfortunate. And so I like the Genius Act. I like that we're bringing this marvelous technology really in a lot of ways into the daylight, so that it can be used in good faith in an accountable way. And I like that. And I think the long-term benefit is the cost of finance hopefully will go down, because it's more efficient. So slight swipe fees that, you talk to retailers and how they fight for those swipe fees, and they don't, like, it takes a chunk out of what they pay. And then that gets built into the prices that you pay. So, this is really, really important. And I'm excited about it. And Don, I kind of don't mind the idea of some of these currencies competing with one another. I mean, that's kind of, maybe that's kind of like the libertarian in me. Probably one area where maybe I overlap with some of the Ron Paul people a little bit is, I look at the way the government manages, our monetary policy. I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole we don't need to go down right now. But I kind of like the idea that these different coins are going to compete with one another a little bit, and then eventually the market's going to find what works here. That I find that really appealing.
And I think, from Fiserv's standpoint, they are the largest core provider in the nation. They have 48% of the market share, I think. Don't quote me on that, but that's somewhere in the 40s. And they've been very leading. They've been on the leading edge of kind of the fintech evolution, whether you're talking embedded banking, whether you're talking neo and digital banking and secondary cores, all the way up to now digital asset platform to support stablecoin compliant with the Genius Act. And there's a lot of cores that are, moving in this space. But Fiserv, from our standpoint, and us being an existing partner with us, we'd say, hey, you fit with us because you're leading in the space. I say that to say this. Fiserv's excited because we have the model we have in North Dakota. We have the Bank of North Dakota that already has relationships and lines with over 91 financial institutions. So Fiserv is looking at, okay, we can build this digital assets platform, make it Genius compliant with 91 financial institutions, or we can work with one that already, so it's a hub and spoke model. And then they're building it, it's going to be core agnostic. So it's not just that opens it up to affect all of banking, and they're going to make it interoperable, which means that this example that we're building, we believe is going to highly benefit North Dakota financial institutions, but then Fiserv can then take it to, the broader nation as an example. I got to ask the question, are you competing with the Fed? No, absolutely not. We think this could be a good example that could maybe merge up with the Fed someday in the work that they're doing to evolve, the Fed lines like FedNow and others to move into this blockchain enabled space and add that value.
So Don, I think on the same day that the Roughrider Coin was announced, the governor and others also introduced a program to help furloughed federal workers at the same time. And I think it's important that listeners understand when we're talking about federal workers, we're not just talking about people who are working in big buildings in Washington, right? We're talking about our neighbors and friends right here in North Dakota. I think both Rob and I absolutely love this program. I think it's the first time that the state has really stepped into this space in a great way. So can you talk just about what that program means? I think there's 7,000 federal employees in the state, something like that. And as this government shutdown continues to drag on, and I don't know about the two of you, but I don't see any end in sight with the two sides not talking to each other. What does this program look like for federal furloughed workers?
Yeah, the Industrial Commission really led the way on this one, and it was that idea that these are North Dakota, these are the people living next to you here in North Dakota that are severely impacted, and probably it's looking like it's going to be one of the longest shutdowns ever. Like Governor Armstrong says, and he's got that experience in Washington. The way you get out of a shutdown is a clean resolution. Well, that's already on the table. So where do you go from there? And I think that's a big question. But it was that idea twofold. These are North Dakota residents living next to you. And then we've got a lot of North Dakota military personnel that are incredibly impacted, which was a differentiator from prior shutdowns. Military personnel were paid, I guess, in prior shutdowns. This is one where, they're likely not to be paid. So that really was the impetus to drive it. And then, we've done a lot of disaster programs. We're standing up for now. We're working on the new farm financial stability for next year, given the stress on ag. What works is kind of us working backwards from the need, not getting in the way of what private market opportunities there are to solve this, but all filling gaps, right? So there's some good banks like Gate City that have a good program to help federal shutdowns. You got USAA, some of those credit unions, but there are some gaps. And so we targeted a program that could step into that gap, quick, short, 2% loan. We've got to charge some interest because it can't, otherwise we run afoul of the gifting law. And so, and that's our standard 2% that the legislature directs. We've got the Rebuilders program set up by the legislature to be used for, and at the behest of the governor. So really all the pieces came into place. There's 9,200 federal workers in the state of North Dakota. And our application window's open and we're getting applications. So we think it'll work.
Tell us a little bit. I mean, some of it's such a chaotic situation in Washington, D.C. So, we're talking about, if we make these loans to federal workers, remember the members of the military, and, the Trump administration is talking about ending some of those jobs. Part of the certainty of this is that they're going to get paid back, but that's another thing that seems to be on the table is maybe they're not going to get back pay. So tell us a little bit about, and again, coming from a place that I think this is a very necessary program, but talk about the risks in that a little bit, in that if some of these workers they take out a loan and then they end up losing their jobs or they don't get their back pay, what's the risk exposure here?
Yeah. So the initial, the broad spectrum risk is most will, not fall into that permanently furloughed, or I'm not sure the exact term, but, that assignment of that back pay, which is in law to be paid by the federal government. We assume that, we assign that a high likelihood of occurring. So the credit risk on that is low. There is the piece of, we don't yet fully have full knowledge of, all the individuals that, are on more of that permanent list, but we're committed and we're working with the governor's office and with our partners to get that list as quickly as we can as it comes out. So we can incorporate that into all of our banks and credit unions who are on the front lines taking these applications. It will not be a perfect science. It will be an imperfect science. But we forecasted various levels of, okay, if we miss and they are permanently, let go, and they've already got it, we factor that into our loss curves. And no matter what forecast we run, even if, the most drastic loss curve, it's still a very minimal financial impact to the bank. In other words, we can withstand it on our balance sheet, given our financial strength. And like the governor said, when he was asked that in the press conference, he said, this is all about balancing risk. And if you weigh helping military, helping our North Dakota residents through the most material shutdown ever versus a little bit higher credit risk that the Bank of North Dakota is still saying, hey, even if it's high, we can withstand it very well. He's basically saying, give me door number one. And I think he's right in that.
Don, are there limits to how much money folks can take out, obviously based on their credit history and all that kind of stuff? But is there a cap?
Yeah, we're not checking credit history on these because we're relying on that back pay and that automation, because we had to make this fast and simple and easy. Otherwise, it really wouldn't work given the speed. The amount will cover up to 90 days. And that's the max we can do, 90 days of your net pay. But it won't be fully advanced up front. It will be as each pay period comes. If the federal government's still shut down and it's your payday, you will get that net amount in your loan through your local bank or credit union. And then your back pay just bills when that comes in, that will pay it first. And then, you'll have that remainder money. So that's the way the system's set up.
And if I can ask one other really quick question, you mentioned the 2%. When I first heard this program, I was like, hey, why not 0%? You answered this, but I don't know that all of the listeners necessarily understand the gifting clause. So can you talk about why it had to be some amount of interest rather than 0%?
Yeah. So we as the Bank of North Dakota, we can't involve ourselves in the grant or the gifting. That's beyond our mission. That's more in other areas of the state. So we do structure ours as loans. There is the gifting clause that, has specifics around that. We can't go down to the 2% level because that matches up with our other legislatively directed programs. So think school construction, we help build schools at 2%, build infrastructure for municipalities at 2%. Loans and clean sustainable energy are typically at that 2%. So there's the matching up of why we chose that.
Don, thank you so much for your time. Fascinating subject matter.
Yeah, good stuff.
Really innovative stuff. And frankly, I mean, sometimes somebody who's ideologically skeptical of having a state-owned bank, this really kind of puts to rest. Like, we can do cool, innovative stuff with this that really helps people. Either building sort of what I consider long-term infrastructure for our economy, the way we move money around, or just helping North Dakotans in a bad situation. So I appreciate you coming on and talking about it all.
Thanks, Don.
Hey, Plain Talk listeners, have something to say? Call or text Plain Talk with your questions, comments, or headlines you want us to cover.
Just dial 701-587-3141. Leave us your message or shoot us a text with your name and location, and you could be featured on an upcoming show.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I am in Jamestown.
Hey, Rob and Chad. My name's Tony. I live in Grand Forks.
That's 701-587-3141.
Call us, text us, vent, praise.
We want you in the conversation. Thanks for being part of the show.
Now let's get back to today's episode.
Off air, after we completed that interview, I posited that as somebody who at times is ideologically skeptical of our state-owned bank, the two things that we talked about showed the ways that the bank can be benefit. And I do think that North Dakota has generally used its state bank in an appropriate way. We've not gone overboard with it. We've not tried to supplant the private banking industry. It's not socialism, even though I've used that word intemperately at times to describe it in the past. But this shows that we can do some really cool, innovative things that provide safety nets and infrastructure, which is, I think, appropriate roles for government. We're not trying to supplant the private sector, but we're trying to help some people that are being hurt by the government, by the way, by the federal government. And also on this other side, we're trying to provide some infrastructure, not unlike roads, not unlike bridges and railroads and everything else, provide some infrastructure over which our economy can operate and hopefully operate more efficiently.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about, could the State Bank of North Dakota be started today in today's political environment? And I think the answer is absolutely no. I think the state mill and elevator, absolutely no. This could not. And so
that's not just a North Dakota thing. Every year or so, you'll hear about another state kicking the tires,
right,
about the Bank of North Dakota, and it died. I mean, California. I don't think you could do it in the most liberal state in the union.
I agree 100%. And so the timing of it was very, very well. But it also is a reminder that we can do big things. We can do innovative things. And sometimes maybe the state should look at some things that maybe are a little bit outside the box and do them. But here's the thing. When we booked Don to come on here to talk about stablecoin, you probably could have heard my groan from 3 blocks away thinking about crypto and stablecoin. But again, this is one of those topics that I felt like I needed to learn something about before we had him on. And I actually learned something. And I still feel like the old man saying, get off my lawn when people talk about this stuff, but I can sort of see a path now.
I think the hard thing is a lot of us look at what they're doing. I think cryptocurrency was kind of sold as being very consumer facing before it was obvious to most consumers who aren't like drug lords what benefit this has. Like, right, hugely volatile currency that is a pain in the rear end to use. What benefit is that to me? And I think the real, at least in the immediate future, I think the real benefit is on the back end, talking about things like, hey, maybe we can kind of break the de facto monopoly that the credit card industry has on swipe fees. Maybe we can be able to move money faster in an accountable way, in a secure way that's also cheaper. I'm
sure you've been at restaurants and other places where there's an upcharge if you use a credit card. I think
do that, like especially if you're buying large volumes of gas, they'll do that.
People are annoyed by it. Because it gets passed on to us.
I managed a retail store for a while. And when you start, I could see the financials for our store. And when you start thinking about a store that does $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in transactions a day, and then there's a 2% swipe fee, yeah, it adds up day after day after day. That is a big chunk of our business. You give a business back 2% of its revenue. I mean, goodness, that's a big deal.
Yeah, and I also think the state stepping into the space makes a lot of sense because it's hard to imagine some bank in some small town setting up their own sort of stablecoin system, right? I mean, and so I think that having the state sort of have this level set where everybody's hopefully using the same stablecoin, I think will be good in the long run.
We have a lot of small regional banks in North Dakota.
Yeah.
And increasingly, they have to compete with the financial giants of the world because it's not just about putting some money in savings and having a checking account anymore. We're expecting a lot more. And these small banks, they have to be able to handle international transactions. I mean, things that his point about the ag people who operate in international markets and having an on and off ramp for currency. Holy smokes, that makes a ton of sense. I hadn't even considered that.
And that's real money. That's not a roll of quarters, right?
Just the arbitrage when you're talking about like large transactions having to be filtered through multiple currencies.
Yep.
I mean, the arbitrage there can be enormous if you don't play it right. And so the difficulty, if there's a way to sort of build a bridge where you get some of that uncertainty out, boy, that would be a lot of benefit. So I'm fascinated to see how this is going to run. And also, by the way, we didn't ask him this question, but it's on. If you go to the Bank of North Dakota, they have like a little information page and a FAQ, frequently asked questions. And one of the things is like, what did this cost in order for us to do this? And the thing is zero so far. Yeah. I mean, it's something we're doing in partnership with Fiserv. So, I mean, very efficient. It's not like there's a big cost to taxpayers to get this set up. Right. This is a very cool thing that they're doing.
Well, it is a very cool thing, but I think I'm a little bit with you when I saw the press conference, like, oh, that's interesting. And I was like, why are we wasting our time on this? And so, again, diving a little deep, trying to understand how this affects individual North Dakotans. I look forward to seeing the path forward. It is hard. It is, such an old man thing to be like, I can use cash in my credit card. Why would I want to change anything? It works just fine for me. And I'm trying to get out of that mindset, but man, it's hard.
I mean, the gadget head sort of futurist, libertarian sci-fi nerd in me likes this stuff, but I'm also aware that sometimes it could be tempting to adopt technology just because it's new and shiny. And so I think both sides need to be there. Sometimes we do things a certain way because it works.
Yeah. And just be clear, sci-fi stands for science fiction. And so thinking about things that appeal to you because there's science fiction might not be the best in the nonfiction world we live in.
Although if we want to talk about like the number, NASA used to employ science fiction writers like Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein as part of the space program because their theorizing drove real technological innovation. Again, Neil Stephenson, we call cryptocurrency because Neil Stephenson wrote a book called Cryptonomicon. That's where the name comes from.
Man, you are in your wheelhouse right now. I mean, this is just like you talking to yourself and me trying to keep track.
I know.
I am really impressive.
I am such a nerd. And by the way, Cryptonomicon is a fantastic. I was so excited about this interview. I checked it out from the library on my phone so that I can read it again. It's a prick of a book. It's like 1,100 pages, but it is fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I encourage everybody to read it. I'm not going to.
You're missing out, Chad. Hey, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about carbon.
Hold on, just really quick. Speaking of missing out, how are the Yankees doing in the playoffs?
Not great. I don't know why you have to be. I've been such a gentleman about.
I know. But we can't just ignore what's going on. I mean, I sort of feel bad. I don't feel bad. I mean, I feel happy for you that you don't have to go through the stress that I'm going through right now. Watching
it is stressful. Postseason.
It is the worst.
It is so like. There are times it's like, I think of myself like I have to watch the game tonight. And I think like, oh my God, I hope Rodon pitches well. It's so
Rob, today's an
nerve-wracking.
off day in the Dodgers Brewers series, and I need it. I
Yeah.
need the day off. So anyway, that was my one jab about baseball. Now we can go on to talk about carbon capture and Summit pipelines if you want.
Were you surprised, like the news that Summit is no longer locked into North Dakota as the destination for the Midwest car? I think that should have been bigger news. Like it kind of happened in a courtroom in Iowa where a lawyer for Summit, what's happening in Iowa is the permit that has been issued by essentially Iowa's version of the Public Service Commission. I'm forgetting what they call it. Their Public Utilities Commission or something like that. The permit that's been issued down there was under judicial review. And so what the lawyers for Summit did is they wanted to call it back saying, we want to amend the permit. So having a legal fight over this permit is moot because we want to change the permit. And the reason why they want to go back and change the permit is they want to consider another route. And they want to consider maybe going to Wyoming and not North Dakota. And I feel like that's really big news for North Dakota that didn't kind of make a lot of news up here. But that's kind of a shockwaves thing when you think about North Dakota's oil industry is saying we need carbon.
We need it
to come to North Dakota. When you think about, the ethanol industry that's tied into it, you think about the people in North Dakota who are invested in this, the landowners who have already signed up and maybe gotten payments or are in line to get payments for easements, coming across their property. That's big news. My headline on this was Wyoming's going to drink our milkshake. And I kind of feel like that's what's happening. The politics around this have become toxic in North Dakota. And so they're just going to go someplace where they're not so toxic.
Right, they become toxic here and also South Dakota, right? I mean, South Dakota is a big part of this.
A line's got to go through South Dakota, right?
Right, and they might be even more toxic down there than they are
that's
here.
Fair. When I say up here, South Dakota,
Yeah.
really bigger problem than North Dakota.
But like we need this if we want to continue to recover as much oil. We also don't want CO2 to be going up in the atmosphere. What's the problem? And it's sort of like, all right, mess around and find out. Well, we're finding out now, and we're finding out, and potentially we're going to lose a huge economic boost into the state of North Dakota. Tax dollars that potentially go to fund our schools, our roads, our infrastructure, our law enforcement, all these different things. With that being said, I think you wrote in your column, Summit probably didn't play this perfectly at the outset, but eventually Summit was going to take their ball and go home.
Well, they eventually, I think Summit made some mistakes at the beginning, but at one certain point, how do you negotiate with people who are just fundamentally believe your pipeline is evil?
Right.
When you look at some of the rhetoric that's out there, there's so many vectors to talk about this. One is like our struggle to build infrastructure in this country, not just carbon pipelines, but petroleum pipelines, natural gas pipelines, even power lines for wind turbines, wind farms, solar farms. It's NIMBY all over the place. And it's probably a reflection of our populist times, and we could talk about social media and that's impact on public discourse and all that stuff. But it is getting to the point where we can't build things in this country anymore. And that's going to be a problem, not just for North Dakota, but the whole country.
Can you continue to expect low electricity prices, low oil and gas prices at the pump, and still say no to every single infrastructure need in the country?
And also expect that, we're going to get all these great new services. We're going to have cloud computing for gaming and AI and all these things that Americans want to use that consume electric cars. Americans want these things, but these things also drive up demand. And so we've got to meet that demand somehow. And that means building more infrastructure. So this just seems very frustrating. And just to put a point on how on the bleeding edge North Dakota was on this, we were the first state in the nation to have primacy to be able to issue permits for carbon wells. Where we can, where the Fed said, okay, North Dakota, you have a regulatory process set up. You can issue permits and allow people to sequester carbon underground. We were the first state in the nation. The second state was Wyoming. And now I think Wyoming's going to pass us because for whatever reason, Wyoming's politics, and they don't have South Dakota on their flank, but there's other states that are getting in on this too. Colorado, I think Nebraska, and one other, maybe Kansas. I'm forgetting now, but there's other states that are applying for this. So there's other states that are waking up to the potential that North Dakota had, we're going to lose our spot at the head of the pack if we haven't already, and that's going to hurt us.
And we've historically the bipartisan support for carbon capture. Kent Conrad, Byron Dorgan, Heidi Heitkamp, John Hoven, Kevin Kramer. I mean, all these different people, they saw how important CO2 capture was for two reasons. One, again, for oil enhanced recovery. We can get more oil out of the ground in the Bakken if we have CO2, right? And then the climate part of it. If you believe in human-made climate change, we're not going to get to where we need to be on efficiency. We need to use these sort of technologies to get to where we need to get on CO2 not going into the atmosphere. And it just seems short-sighted. And again, it's like when you say no to everything, I mean, you can't, like you're saying, you can't negotiate with folks who think the pipeline is evil. There was no amount of money that was going to get them there. There was no route that was going to get them. How is Summit supposed to negotiate with that? There's no alternative.
So and you're right. And even on the climate change part of it, you don't have to believe what Al Gore believes. You don't have to believe, and I don't. I believe that humans affect the climate. Right. I feel like in some of the ways are negative, and we need to be cognizant of it. I mean, how could we not? The billions of humans and all the things that humans are doing on the surface of this planet, of course, is impacting the environment. You don't have to believe that there's Armageddon just around the corner, like Greta Thunberg does. You just don't. But why is it a bad thing to develop the capacity to control our impact on the environment? I think of it like installing a thermostat where we can turn it up, turn it down. We got to capture more of this gas. Oh, maybe we're capturing too much of it. We can let some more out. To me, yes, let's develop that technology and that ability to control this so that we can protect against any potential calamities in the future. Why would we not want this? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Especially when the other side of that is positive economic impact, right? I mean, if you don't believe in the climate change, the Al Gore thing, you still can believe in the fact that we want to pump more oil out of the ground in Western North Dakota. To me, it's frustrating.
Right. The one negative is the private sector can't do this on its own. These emissions are an externality that they can't necessarily monetize, although there is some hope that as the oil industry needs the carbon, you can monetize at least some of it. But there's not really a market for all this carbon that we produce. We produce far more of it than we could ever use. Maybe that's going to change in the future where we find new ways to use the carbon. But for the most part, we produce as a nation far more than we need. Although what the estimate, I was shocked by this when I looked it up for my column, the needs of the oil industry are like triple what all of the coal plants in North Dakota produce in a year.
Right. So we have to get that CO2 from somewhere else.
Right. So we have to bring it here. And that is very, very frustrating. And it's been frustrating to watch. It's just intransigence. It's the worst sort of horseshoe politics where it's kind of the far right and the far left who are just locked into positions and they don't care about anything else. And, they've been successful. Although it is interesting that, I think you very astutely, most of the problem is in South Dakota. And if you look at the fact that South Dakota, like sort of the populist faction, both Republican, North Dakota and South Dakota dominated by Republicans, but the populist faction has had much more success getting legislative seats and elected seats in South Dakota than they have in North Dakota, where the normies are still, for the most part, in charge. That is a stark difference between those two states right now.
I think the start and why that is, and we've talked about this on here before. In North Dakota, we understand energy production. In South Dakota, the populist movement, Summit Pipeline was the issue that was used for the populists to beat the normie Republicans. That issue doesn't work as well here. And so they have to focus on other issues like book bans and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Although ethanol, South Dakota is an ag state too. This pipeline is not, the carbon, it's not the Summit Pipeline specifically. And I want to be clear because this pipeline is not really anything to do with the oil industry directly. This is collecting from ethanol plants and then bringing it to North Dakota for sequestration. I think the oil industry's interest is the larger thing where they don't want to see the public turn on the concept of these pipelines in general because they're going to need the carbon. But the Summit pipeline, I would have thought that in South Dakota, like the ethanol people would have some clout down there, but I guess not.
Yeah.
Or at least not enough.
For sure. Rob, I think we got a voicemail, didn't we?
Voicemail. Yeah, that's just what I was going to it. Cole from Horace left us a voicemail. Let's play that now. We want to react to that. And by the way, if you want to leave us a voicemail or send us a text, 701-587-3141. We love getting these. Go ahead and play that, Matt.
Hey, Rob and Chad. This is Cole calling from Horace. We live in really divided times right now. I live pretty online as a Gen Zer, and it's awful out there. I hate it. But here in North Dakota, I mean, it's kind of interesting seeing someone like Tammy Miller and our current Lieutenant Governor, Michelle Strinden, coming together for an event at the Capitol, talking about something very bipartisan. And obviously they're on the same side of the aisle, but we all know what happened last year in the election cycle. And it's interesting just seeing all those folks come together and talk about something we can all really agree with and celebrate something worth celebrating, which is what I'm here in Bismarck to do, which is employee ownership and the great ESOP companies we have in North Dakota. Tammy Miller mentioned to me that Chad supports them or knows of them, and it's not really a huge political issue on the state or federal level, maybe, which would be Rob's interest, but it is an issue that so many great ESOP stories and wealth building potential for frontline workers, which is where my passion lies. And wanted to give you guys a call just because I'm an active listener and love what you guys do and talk about, and hope to keep listening. So take care.
There's some things to unpack. First, a Gen Z guy, so he'll probably appreciate our crypto.
Yeah, maybe we can have him on to explain it to us even better.
It to you. I understand this stuff. You're the old man in this equation.
Yeah, but who puts it into the computers to mine?
Yeah. well, although again, stablecoins don't have to be mined.
Right. No, I understand stablecoin. It's still the crypto piece that I don't get. Like who puts it in the computer machines on the Google?
Yeah, it's a whole other thing. A lot to unpack. That first of all, his reference to Michelle Strinden and Tammy Miller coming together. I mean, that was obviously Strinden was on the ticket with our Governor Armstrong. Tammy Miller challenged Kelly Armstrong for the Republican primary last year, and that got pretty brutal and pretty ugly. And so I think he's right. I mean, I think Cole is right saying that it's nice to see them come together and still work together, and we need more of that in politics. That's nice. His talk about ESOPs, I'll be honest with you, I barely know what these things are.
So I do, and it's funny, when we had Tammy on at one point during the governor's campaign, we talked a little bit about ESOPs, and I expressed my intrigue. I wouldn't say I support them, because I think there's, like so many things, there's good ESOPs and there's bad ESOPs, and there's a lot of different things. But it is an intriguing concept that, and I don't know anything about the event.
Well, lay that out.
So it's essentially a way that employees, their retirement is paid to them in stock in the company, and so they're sort of employee owned. And there are some potential hiccups. I'm a union guy, as folks know, that there's times where the workers might want to talk about working conditions or those kind of things. And management will say, well, you're one of the owners because it's employee owned. So it creates some conflict. But again, if you've got, like with so many things, right? I mean, there's good ones and there's bad ones. I think there's a lot of ESOPs in North Dakota they reference. I mean, Border States is one that Tammy Miller was part of. There's a lot of folks that have benefited from being part of ESOP. So I think it's an intriguing concept of, giving more power to workers, but not perfect, because it always comes down to who's implementing the program.
I think when we talk a lot about these things, we think of them. I always think of the fuel debate when we talk about ethanol and how we're going to fuel our cars in the future. And we're looking for that one silver bullet thing that's replace all the different uses we have for gasoline or diesel. And that may not be the solution. We may have a lot of specific situations that fit in specific ways. And so I kind of think of ESOPs that way. It's going to work for some companies and it's going to work for others. And I don't know how I would feel. I mean, having my retirement tied up in whether or not the company I'm working for is going to exist in 30 years when it's time for me to retire, that's a risk. But
right.
You talked about, if there's a negotiation between the union and letting the union workers have some ownership in the company, so the understanding that impact of their demands on the bottom line might lead to more moderate, more reasonable debates or negotiations sometimes.
Yeah, but generally an ESOP doesn't have unions. Like they're sort of separate things. And so again, I think it's a case by case. I would love to have Tammy Miller come on here again. And because I think when we've talked about this in the past, it was in the midst of a political campaign where we were talking about 807 different issues. To have her sort of talk through an ESOP and what's the advantage for employers and employees and that kind of thing, I think it'd be fascinating.
Is that where because she was obviously former CEO of Border States Electric, which is a very large, very important company and based in North Dakota and operates in our region. Do they have an ESOP? I mean, I wonder if that's
Yep.
kind of...
Border States is an ESOP. Yep. And so one of the things, I don't know if Tammy's still on their board or what, but I know she's a big fan of the concept. And I think this event is...
Implemented it when she was CEO, maybe.
What's that?
Maybe she implemented it when she was CEO.
She may have, or she came into it, but I know she's a big fan. And there's several in North Dakota that are rather large ESOPs that I think it's a concept that's confusing to people because it's a new concept, but I think it's worth having a conversation. Again, like so many things, there's good ones and there's bad ones. There's no perfect, just like there's good lawyers and bad lawyers and good podcast hosts and bad podcast hosts.
Yeah. It kind of, I mean, bringing it back full circle to the stablecoin, it's one of those things where ESOPs are an option, and then you let the marketplace do with it what it will. It's going to make sense for some companies. It's not for others, but it's an option and it's out there. You can use it or not use it. I think the mistake we make in politics is we think, well, this is the way it should be done, and we try to shoehorn everything into that way of doing it. We're better off sort of backing off and letting the different companies and different workforces and unions and all that stuff work this stuff out for themselves.
Right. I think ultimately, I'm of the opinion that union workers having a seat at the table to negotiate their working conditions and their pay and all that thing is really, really important. But this might be another option for employees to get a piece of the pie, right? I mean, how often do people work for big corporations and they see the CEO getting a $300 million buyout or, golden parachute or whatever, and they're thinking, I'm still making $38,000 a year. This is a way for folks to benefit from the success of their work.
Well, and also, I think also exposing them to the other side of the argument where it's not always a greedy CEO who's making a ton of money. Sometimes it's like, we would like to give in to your demands, but it's going to put us out of business.
Right.
Having some hooks on both sides of that.
Rob, it's funny. All this comes down to communication, right? And trying to understand where the other side is coming from and having honest dialogue.
Well, and also creating a situation where, okay, we have to work together to make this thing go forward. So you can have jobs and we can have profits and we can all prosper. So that's a good thing. Hey, coming up on Friday, former Senator Heidi Heitkamp is going to be on. She may be joined by former New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, because she is, they're part of and it's interesting because it's kind of a left-right thing that they're putting on. The Brookings Institute and the American Enterprise Institute, they have a commission on rural prosperity. And I think that's really interesting right now, given what's going on in Washington, D.C., given what's going on with the trade war, given what's going on with interest rates and everything. There's kind of a surcharge. When you live out rural, sometimes a lot of things are more expensive because it's harder to get it out there to you. So they're having some hearings about that and they're working up something. I think that's really interesting. So that's going to be on Friday. Remember, you can follow us on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, X. Plain Talk ND is our handle. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. My first reaction was super cool.